Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today I want to talk about the inventor of America's first indigenous music style, at least in the modern age, so lost 500 years. And this is, of course, Scott Joplin. Now, Scott Joplin is the inventor of and king of ragtime, a genre that really swept both America and the wider world in many ways in the very late 19th and early 20th century, right up to and slightly through the First World War. And its popularity continued to be very influential and endearing even after this sort of initial golden period of popularity, if you were. Now, Joplin thought of ragtime not as a form of popular music, let alone folk music, but he thought of it as a new form of classical music. And when you listen closely to a lot of his compositions, you can hear some influences that you might not necessarily expect. Now, a lot of people talk about how much of the rhythmic dexterity required in the left hand of the pianist playing this owes a lot to Afro-American spirituals and even to music from directly from Africa itself, where rhythm is what shapes the melody, quite unlike European music, where it is melody that shapes the rhythm. But there were lots of other interesting influences too. There were influences of Prussian marches and of John Philip Sousa's popularization of that marching style after he had Americanized it. And while this isn't really discussed so much, I also hear a lot of the Strauss family in his music, meaning Johann Strauss and those related to him, the kings of waltz and polka in Vienna and Central Europe as a whole in the 19th century. And so by listening to some of the other popular forms of music at this time, and I'm saying popular and not pop for a reason, which we'll get to, he ended up inventing a music that is on the one hand as technically demanding as much classical music is for the pianist, but he also did something he didn't intend to do or even want to do. He invented pop music, and there were two really important reasons for this. One which was in his control, though it happened unconsciously, and one which was because he was a victim of circumstance or someone who benefited by circumstance, depending on how the cookie crumbles. So, first, the things that were in his control. The ragtime music that he created, much like Sousa's marches or the polkas of the Strauss family, they were so catchy. They were memorable, as all great melodies are. When I talk about modern LPs, I say, what makes a good album? Well, it's something that has no filler and the composition is memorable. It sticks with you. You can't get it out of your head. And that's what Scott Joplin's music is like. Even for those of you who haven't heard his name, you know The Entertainer, you know the Maple Leaf Rag, you have heard these songs, you've heard them in commercials and cartoons and movies and TV on streaming. You have heard them, and that shows just how this music has endured for so long, just as long as any of the other, frankly, major classical music of this era. So, although he thought of his music more as sort of the kinds of things that one would play alongside, let's say, a Chopin waltz or a Scriabin etude, it became music that entered the popular realm. Because it had all of the elements that made it popular, but there was no pop music before. There's always been popular things, popular boys, popular girls, but pop music specifically came about when music could be sold in a reproducible form that didn't require a musician. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the initial thing that meant is piano rolls that would be played in a player piano. You had player organs at this time that worked on the same principle. And then around the same time, but it took a bit longer to catch on, recorded sound. First with the Edison cylinders, then with shellac records, etc. Now we've got streaming, but it's all recorded music. And the technology of the day enabled Joplin's music to spread further than it could have done in an age that was less geared up technologically. And so the reason that when we think of ragtime, we sometimes think of player pianos is because Joplin was writing at the time when the player piano was the thing to have. Recorded sound on the Edison cylinder was very low fidelity, but a player piano has perfect fidelity because it is an actual piano. It's just being played played mechanically rather than by a human. And ragtime was by no means the only genre. Classical music, like I said, Scriabin made piano rolls, but the piano rolls made from Joplin's compositions were very, very popular. Now, in the early days of recorded music, there was plenty of ragtime being recorded as well. Now, ragtime gradually faded out of fashion, but it influenced so many other forms of music. Even though ragtime and blues have some similar roots in African American culture, Black culture, depending on how you want to phrase it, the blues as we know it, the blues as we came to know it, is actually a newer form of music by a little bit than ragtime. So ragtime really was the first American style of music to be indigenous. Scott Joplin was to the US what Mikhail Glinka was to Russian music, which also began comparatively later compared to, let's say, the music of Germanic culture or French culture or Italian culture. Um, so without Joplin, blues and jazz and all of its derivatives, swing, I would say even bebop and hard bop, rock and roll, R&B, all of them owe a lot to Joplin. He was someone who really was one of the rare musical revolutionaries of the world, and he had the popularity to prove it. He also composed operas and more long form works, but it is his rags that ended up really cementing his name in the annals of great composers because people love them. It was very influential, and technology helped to make it pop music. I said in a video from a while back, what was the first pop song ever? Probably Irving Berlin's Alexander's Ragtime Band. So this sort of jack of all trades pop song composer made a song about ragtime, and there would be no about ragtime without the inventor of it. So that's my take. Let me know what you think in the comments, and as always, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.